These hands were once used for battle. Now they're but humble tools for peace. I need to figure out exactly who I am. I want to choose my own path, live in the moment. My superheroing days are over. Remember what I told you? You ever feel lost? Just look into the eyes of the people that you love. Not me. What? Just listening.
Welcome back, everyone. This will be my Thor Love and Thunder trailer video. Marvel finally dropped a trailer. Finally, there's a whole bunch of Easter eggs. Obviously, they show off some stuff, not everything, but we'll break it all down. If you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to get all the videos. But what's going on here is that they start the trailer without any kind of music or anything, and it's Thor running through the woods of old Asgard when it was still around during different ages in his life. So like he starts out as a little kid, he's got brownish hair, but then he runs past the tree, he's a little bit older, he's wearing the classic Walt Simonson, classic Jack Kirby costume. Like this is old school Thor from the really old comics. There's a lot of later references to that with some of his other costumes that I'll point out in a second. But then he's a little bit older, he's like teenage version of Thor, he has a slightly different costume. Then he's a little bit bigger, and it's before the events of Thor Ragnarok, before Asgard is destroyed. His costume changes to the more modern versions that we've seen during the Infinity Saga of movies a couple different times. Then in the last one, when he's surrounded by fire, he's in the middle of this battle, seemingly, as he's talking about how he used to be this god of battle. Then we see that he's meditating under this giant tree that looks kind of like it's meant to represent the World Tree as he buries a version of Mjolnir in the ground to think about his life. This is meant to represent, obviously, present day. The burning, obviously, meant to represent with the way they cut the voiceover, Thor Ragnarok in old Asgard burning in the new version of Asgard. We do see a version of new Asgard as they show us Valkyrie very briefly. But one of the coolest Easter eggs here in the different versions of costumes that they cycle through as he's thinking about his life is that even later in the movie, he gets another costume change, which is inspired more by Rune King Thor, with a lot of Easter eggs going back to the original costume, like it's blue, gold. You don't see him wearing the helmet here, but he's wearing the wings again. It's gonna be crazy. I say Rune King Thor because a big theme of this trailer, especially at the beginning before the music track kicks in, which is Guns N' Roses' Sweet Child of Mine. The whole thing with Thor thinking about his life is what we basically saw, like, I need to find out where my place is in the world. That was the whole thing when he left to go with the Guardians. We see a montage of him early in the movie going on a bunch of different battles to different planets, different systems with the Guardians of the Galaxy, called them the Asgardians of the Galaxy. You notice that Gamora is not with them because they haven't found that version of Gamora yet, or they haven't been able to get her to come back. Remember, it's Gamora from 2014, so she's not in love with Peter Quill. That's going to be a big part of Guardians 3. That'll all take place after the events of Thor Love and Thunder. The whole idea that Thor is, again, kind of shirking his abilities. He's actually a legit god in the MCU. A little G god, but he's still a god. And you have Gorr the God Butcher coming along slaughtering all these MCU gods because he feels like they don't care about their subjects. And that's kind of what Thor has been doing, shirking his responsibilities. We've been talking about the MCU gods during the Moon Knight series. That's going to clarify a little bit how they exist slightly differently from the just really powerful cosmic beings, because there are legit gods in the MCU. So part of this movie is Thor realizing that he has a greater cosmic responsibility to the universe than what he's been doing so far. And there's a lot of trials that he has to go through, like Odin went through trials to attain his even greater cosmic power and become a legit god before he then passed it on to Thor and his children. A big part of the movie is Thor going through that as well, and then attaining even more power and becoming even more responsible as a character. When you see the music track kick in and that funny montage of him as Fat Thor just working all that fat off, getting back to being the buff version of Thor, Zoom in and enhance on the hat. It actually says Strongest Avenger, which is a reference to Thor Ragnarok when Tony Stark left the password just to harass him, just to make fun of him a little bit. Technically, he was able to beat the Hulk, and the Hulk could soak most of his damage, and they could just fight each other. But the whole idea is that as an MCU cosmic god, Thor could theoretically gain even more power than the Hulk. I'll do a separate Hulk videos when we get to the She-Hulk series about how powerful theoretically they could get. But the joke here is that he starts the workout montage, he's working the fat off. You see him in that room with the skeleton of this giant godlike creature, or just giant creature that looks kind of humanoid. One of the funny things about the trailer you probably noticed is that as they're playing the music track and he's thinking about his life, talking to Star-Lord, who seems like he's grown a little bit wiser since the events of Avengers Endgame, become a little bit more of a leader, giving him some advice about finding what he loves. In each of the different systems that the Guardians team goes to with Thor, you see them standing amidst this giant battlefield with a bunch of dead characters all around them. As if doing all this fighting just comes so naturally to him, like he's not even thinking about it, like, this is no big deal. That's just to set up how powerful he is earlier in the movie before he gets stomped by a version of Gorr the God Butcher with whatever his version of the Necro Sword is going to be called in the movie. But essentially, it's the same basic deal, like it's a cosmic power level weapon that allows him to kill gods, because gods don't die the same way that normal humans die. You see him wearing a really casual looking costume with jeans and a jacket, but it's meant to be this big Easter egg for Eric Masterson's Thunderstrike Thor because he looked kind of like the construction worker Thor before he gained the powers of Thor. But if you couldn't tell, the reason why the jacket is meant to be red is because right now he's actually being called Ravagers Thor, like he's part of the Ravagers, even though we make a lot of Asgardians of the Galaxy jokes and jokes about him leading the team instead of Star-Lord leading the team during Avengers Endgame. The t-shirt that he's wearing is actually an 80s inspired design of the World Tree, which is another Thor Easter egg. The belt buckle is also meant to be a Thor Easter egg too. Korg obviously shows up later in the trailer. He has a new belt too, which has the goat horns on it. The two goats from the comics actually show up during this too. They call this the goat boat. That's right out of the Gorr storyline during the comics too. It's another future tech looking Asgardian ship that's designed to look old-timey that Thor uses to fly around when he's not flying around by himself with Stormbreaker. But he is using Stormbreaker to open the Bifrost and travel around through cosmic space. Whatever's just happened, he's reunited with Korg and they left him on this planet as he slowly heads back to Asgard. If you couldn't tell, this is meant to be a version of New Asgard. This is him in the goat boat. The goats from the comics aren't actual goats. They're like cosmic beings that have superpowers that can travel across space, but they look like goats. One of the big changes in New Asgard is they become much more of a real town. It seems like they've embraced tourism. They become more like a real actual place in the world that people could actually travel to and enjoy. And part of the joke here is that they've just grown more business-like, and Valkyrie is getting really pissed off. Like she's upset at having to be King Valkyrie or Queen Valkyrie, whatever you want to call her, before Gorr the God Butcher shows up, and then she has to suit up in her brand new armor too. She actually posted a picture of what she looks like in her King Valkyrie costume, because we don't really see that during the trailer. I think part of the idea with her becoming king is it's more of a title when it's given to her. She wasn't born of Odin, so she doesn't have the god level powers that Thor has. The backdoor with Jane Foster Thor is that the magic enchantment that Odin put on the hammer, which helps it reform, I'll talk about that in a second too because it's a really big deal, is that Odin's enchantment is sort of the workaround that gives her the exact same power that Thor had, or most of the power that he had when he did that. We could call this Pirate Thor because it's him just with a bunch of other women, giving you as many funny tropes for the Thor character as possible. This could be a completely different planet, but it could just be the outside of the Mount Olympus area where the Greek gods live. Because obviously later in the trailer, we do see a version of Zeus, who's played by Russell Crowe no less. It's going to be a big celebrity cameo with his classic lightning bolt. I think part of the idea for introducing him in the movie is just to give Gorr another character to just mow through. So R.I.P. Zeus, Russell Crowe. I don't think he's going to be in the movie for that long, but I do think that whatever scene he has will be really cool. Something to hype up how badass Christian Bale's Gorr the God Butcher really is before Thor winds up taking him down. If you're not a longtime Marvel comic book fan, yes, a lot of the Greek gods have similar names to the Eternals characters who are also based on a lot of the Greek gods, a lot of the other gods too around Earth's cultures. The way that Mount Olympus exists relative to the rest of the universe is supposed to be similar to the way that Asgard existed relative to the rest of the MCU. Marvel's always had a problem in the comics trying to reconcile all this different mythology, so it's always been a little bit confusing, which is why you don't see a lot of those types of characters show up. But because they're introducing Zeus in the MCU, that might mean that they're also introducing a version of Hercules who has been featured a lot. Like, Hercules is a huge character, he's been part of the Avengers for a long time, so maybe during the movie they'll wind up teasing his character. They have the funny scene of Thor and Star-Lord as he's trying to give him this heart-to-heart talk about looking into the eyes of what he loves, like finding what he loves, but Thor is actually looking into Star-Lord's eyes as if Thor suddenly thinks of him as like his best friend ever in the time that he's been with him. Because he's wearing that new costume, this is obviously right before the Guardians of the Galaxy leave on their own and then go off to a different planet looking for that version of Gamora, and Thor goes off with Korg on the goat boat on their journey. For those of you wondering, because Star-Lord still does have the DNA that's like half little g god, half celestial, technically he would not be on Gorr's shit list, because Gorr is looking for the legit gods of the MCU. But if Peter Quill called himself a god in Gorr's presence, that would really piss him off, and he probably would try to kill him. Technically, the Celestials are not little g gods like Ego said. Ego was just kind of saying that to make himself seem bigger. The Celestials are more like super powerful cosmic beings. They're not meant to be legit gods of the MCU. But as you see all these colors fly into the O of the new version of the logo, that's just meant to represent a version of the Bifrost and Thor traveling around using it and Stormbreaker with the goat boat. Then we finally get a version of Jane Foster Thor summoning the reformed hammer as Thor just can't believe what's going on, and there's this giant battle going on around them with Gorr's minions inside New Asgard. So a couple things here that they've changed from the comics. Her costume is meant to be a little more inspired by the classic Thor costume and classic Valkyrie's costume, but what's going on here is that this is MCU Jane Foster who just happens to be visiting Asgard when this happens, and the hammer that she's wielding is the original hammer that Hela broke, but the whole idea is that when she broke it physically, she didn't break the enchantment that was on it. Based on the other footage that we've seen, it just seems like she's nearby, and Gorr the God Butcher probably attacks. New Asgard needs a protector. Thor isn't around when that happens. Jane Foster happens to be visiting the shrine that they built to Odin when he died on the cliff face here, because this is the same area where he died, but it also seems like they basically just erected a shrine around the pieces of Mjolnir. If you're wondering how it's possible to do that because the enchantment's still on it, then technically if you're not worthy, you wouldn't be able to lift the pieces. You could still lift the ground on which the pieces of Mjolnir rest. As long as you're carrying the boulder around and not physically touching Mjolnir, you're fine. You can carry the hammer around wherever you want it to go. So it just seems like she physically touches Mjolnir when Gorr is attacking, and that's enough to activate the enchantment and reform the hammer. And Thor's just witnessing this in New Asgard for the first time in his older, brand new costume. Like he has a couple different costumes during the movie. The other big thing here too is that they don't really hide the fact that it is Jane Foster Thor. Like the eyes are big enough, the mask is big enough that you can clearly see that it's Natalie Portman underneath that armor. What they have done though, and this is a big comic book Easter egg, is that she normally has brownish hair. When she activates the enchantment and becomes a version of female Thor, she has blonde hair. So one, Thor's freaking out about seeing a version of Mjolnir, which he thought was destroyed. Two, he's freaking out about seeing a version of Jane Foster, who's still his love interest that he hasn't seen in a long time. And three, he's freaking out about seeing a version of her wielding the hammer itself. Like, what is going on? 3 or 4 different times. But one of the biggest things that they don't show you is actual Christian Bale, Gorr the God Butcher. They're probably going to save that for the next big trailer. And obviously, like I said, they did set a record in how long they waited to release the first footage of the actual movie. It'll also be funny to see if there's a version of Loki from the multiverse that winds up showing up, because it's not quite as much a multiverse movie as some of the other movies like Doctor Strange 2 are. But there will probably be some sort of reference to what's happening during that, because it would be weird to have a version of a Thor movie without a version of Loki. I've done a bunch of videos for the movie so far, so I'll link those in the description below. Let me know if you spotted any big Easter eggs in the trailer that I didn't talk about in the video. Everyone click here for all my other Thor Love and Thunder videos, and click here to learn about the connection between Kang the Conqueror and the MCU gods during the Moon Knight series. Thank you so much for watching, everyone stay safe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.